Welcome back, everyone. We're now at our lunchtime keynote for the 33rd Annual Far West Popular Culture Association. I hope you're all having a great conference and let us know if anything is interfering with that. So it is lunchtime in Las Vegas here, and it is my pleasure to introduce our remote keynote speaker. Lauren Michele Jackson is a rising scholar, and I think it is very fitting that she is the 2021 winner of the Felicia Campbell Innovative Contributions to Popular Culture Studies Award. Dr. Jackson is an assistant professor of English and African American Studies at Northwestern University and a contributing writer at The New Yorker. She's the author of White Negroes from Beacon Press and a forthcoming book, Back, an American Tale from Amistad Press. She has a vibrant voice and is somebody to watch, and I think we're all going to learn something. So, Dr. Jackson, I'm about to turn this over to you. I'm going to stop sharing and make you the presenter. Okay, so you should be up. You just have to unmute yourself, which I see you have. I'm going to mute and
Okay, great. Where we go? Okay. So before I officially begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am currently located on the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox, also call this area home. This region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States resides in Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of the city and celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways. Also, I would like to heartily thank everyone involved in the conference, including participants and audience members, for inviting me here. This is actually my first digital conference, if you can believe it, which means that I get to go run home and tell, well, I guess I am home, but I get to go run back and tell all of my colleagues that it is totally possible. It can be done in a way that is wonderful and accessible and really great and productive. So receiving an invite here was a really big honor, but of course the greatest honor is to be attending in the name of Professor Campbell, whose tributes this morning I found really moving. As has been said, there really is no replacing a luminous presence, sort of once departed to parts unknown, but I think we all share a commitment to bringing our own unique light to the things we study and the things we love, and that's just a really incredible thing to sort of hold in our hands right now. And so without further prefacing, I shall begin in earnest. There are innumerable ways of marking the passage of intellectual thought, plotting the trek from there to here, whether one considers it progress or merely more of the same. For today's humanist, academic or otherwise, few images may be as illustrative as the prospect of an early career English scholar discouraged from her interest in the inventive, the interesting, the weird, and truly original. English and literary studies is a place where you can work on anything, I like to tell prospective students and friends outside the field, only half jokingly. Everything is text, thank you, post-structuralism, from folios of yore to Mario Kart and wine labels, television and tweets. It stretches the imagination from here in a present suffused with routinized competition for our limited attention and limited funds, that a scholar should be cautioned against training an inquisitive gaze on an archetype such as the modern American gambler, or say the wild and wonderful world of science fiction, or even further expanse of ethnic literatures, or anything else Professor Campbell brought to the fore with a scholar's curiosity and devotee's appetite. For years, we have been taught that happiness lies in riding the consumer merry-go-round, hoping to catch the brass ring of contentment, Campbell has written. She continues, we seem to be redesigning the human being to fit the societal model without knowing what compromises the fully functioning individual. In many ways, we were designing under a false set of assumptions. If the system perpetuated itself, we thought survival would be assured. Even in planning for the future, we too often looked for ways to augment the status quo or to simply extend desirable features of our present situation into the future. This comes from a 1976 study I'm sure denizens of the house Professor Campbell built know well, and on the future of gambling, gamblers, and also humanity. What impresses upon the mind, even a quarter century removed, is an attention that wanders from convention, planting stakes elsewhere from established norms or indeed a societal model, as Campbell says. This not unlike the main character of her research, which is nothing so staid as an institution or a phenomenon, or but rather a figure set off from a community. She writes, the behavior of the gambler is not at all congruent with these established patterns. His goals seem unrealistic. He bucks the odds and finds excitement in doing so. He or she, and the she feels very pointed if you consider the sort of time in which this was published in the 70s, he or she is frequently willing to forsake secure monetary practices for a chance at the big take. The gambler steps beyond established bounds and creates a new frame of reference. He welcomes and often thrives in change. In the toss of the dice, he may move from rags to riches in a way antithetical to traditional modes of saving money, making sound investments, or benefiting from occupational advancement. The parallels between the subject of interest and the interested practically draw themselves. Whatever we may think of the gambler, the spirit of reference breaking and odds testing makes for a most exciting academic citizen, period. When she arrived, the university could scarcely have been called little more than a glimmer in the middle of nowhere. But Campbell's vision for what a higher education might be composed of did not rely on a facsimile of courses of studies past. She leaves behind a niche as formidable as the old guard itself, that persists in the face of disaster at multiplying scales, that is rather best capable of wading through the mire and pleasures to be found in popular art during a time when the staples of high art are now peeking over the shoulders of genres once considered beneath recognition. Teaching a course on the 1970s, as I am now, I find myself frequently urging my students to treat the past with care, to consider of a to so many systems and institutions and lines of inquiry taken for granted. And yet there is something thrillingly impossible about this ask, to imagine from within that without which we wouldn't be here among ourselves, talking so seriously and casually about the high and low ways of being in the world. While I did not have the good fortune of crossing paths with Professor Campbell prior to her passing last July, I've enjoyed being privy to the sorts of exchanges usually reserved for chance meetings in a hallway or cozy post-conference meals. I've been struck but not surprised by the blueprint set before me, the way my sense of my own work has been the unknowing echo of her ethos. Publishing, teaching, rabble-rousing, long-term friend H. Peter Stevens has described, the trifecta of the professoriate at its best, if you ask me. Unsurprisingly, my favorite summary of her scholarship comes from the queen of pop culture herself. There are people who specialize in one particular area and they never get tired of it, and God love them, she said, but I would lose my mind. I came into grad school calling myself an Americanist and came out studying, well, I'm not quite sure what exactly. It would seem antithetical to the whole idea of grad school, but I'm almost certain my idea of what I wanted to do entering an English program was somehow more limited and more general upon graduation. I felt far too chagrined at the prospect of exposing any of you directly to my archive of undergraduate feelings about literature, but suffice to say, I was very interested in 19th century writing for its strangeness. Yet it was the conversations about that strangeness with others in the classroom that propelled my intrigue as much as text on the page. How do I do more of this? I asked one of my instructors, who I did not then but now recognize in retrospect as a chipper yet precarious student herself. The answer sounded so simple. Go to grad school. Keep doing this. My first step to success in grad school, that same student told me a few years later, would be to rid myself of television. This suggested as if it were any sort of humane course of action. Now, I'm not a total slouch. I mean, I do read, but the very proposition was an offense to the soul and instilled a daunting vision of the future if this is what passed for an ideal environment of scholarly activity. I didn't listen, of course. I had a nice, lightweight flat screen in my bedroom, which was also my living room, entryway, and half of the kitchen. I tuned my day to the TBS lineup, Married with Children and Fresh Prince in the morning, King of Queens and Seinfeld greeting me home from class. Even worse, I had the internet. I was scrolling myself to sleep the night of December 12th, 2013, when I was jolted upright by the announcement that, yes, Beyonce Giselle Knowles-Carter released a new album, and no, there was no warning, and there appears to be a super glossy high concept video accompanying every single song. This all while consuming the usual newbie literary critics fare, learning to talk the talk of punctum and object and rupture and surface and periphery, modernism and trauma, or at least giving it a good go. Perhaps we can blame my indulgent media diet for the way that training dispenses in my work, as likely applied to a revived cartoon from the 90s as a work of ambitious poetry. But is that diet as we're wont to call it, by the way, a hint of the moral crises weighing invocations of mass cultural subjects? But is a diet of everyday objects such an odd habit after all? It is the sought-after touchstone during cab rides, back when cab rides were a thing, in other occasional small talk, back when small talk was a thing. It's what unites no fewer than several group chats in my phone, dedicated in some fashion or other to the rhythms of reality shows, celebrity gossip masquerading as politics, mass market trade fiction. Indeed, in the new millennium post-2010 scape, when fandoms pose immense hubs unto themselves and legacy publications seed their pages to Marxist readings of Sweet Green and Sally Rooney or affective accounts of dating in the digital age, one has to suspect that the solitary single topic thing is the odd one out. Retreating from the world and all its dazzle and shit is not only boring, but in a sense irresponsible, a kind of critical malpractice. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe criticism, as well as criticism's objects, have a politics, and or critics can be political, and or art can be art, and that these threads repel and attract each other in modulating and oft unpredictable ways. The late Richard Eighten, in his groundbreaking study In Search of the Black Fantastic, traversed the divide between serious Black politics and Black political culture taken seriously without forfeiting their respective tangles. The outsider is always inside, he wrote. A reading as applicable to cultural production deemed external to the work of grassroots or electoral political politics as America's semi-permanent lowest caste whose conceptions of art, music, laughter, and politics historically resides beyond the realm of legible activity by default. Events of late, which are also in some sense events of always, have, I've noticed, inspired small crises among my friends and peers who live, breathe, and sleep popular culture, even and especially those who live, breathe, sleep popular culture usually unapologetically. Elections and protest and murder and death, felt so intensely by critics coming into their own over the past few years, have thrust upon them the imperative that their work must do something, affect something monumental and real, or else for what is the time spent? What had once been such a revelatory adage gifted from decades of feminist thought and Black feminist criticism, that interpretation need not be limited by the mere terms an object ventures for itself, that literature that doesn't know it does race the way it does gender without knowing it. This became the imperative that talking about art must include an implicit suggestion that it does these things well or very badly, even if we're not so sure from within our coteries and within ourselves what either means exactly. Art now more than ever, so to speak. We are certainly consuming more pop culture now more than ever. There is more to see and more to miss and more, just more. But what's there to do about it? I fear this question. I fear what it will do. I worry it does too much. If the work of the critic of pop culture must prove itself, if the work of the critic of pop culture must prove itself politically now, else be obsolete, then why it has always been so. If a text, and any text about that text must sign, seal, and deliver its ballot, then why not cast the ballot and save our word processors the trouble? Over the past summer, I witnessed some of that doing in action applied to works of literature that do so much more than change hearts and minds, and would perhaps only do so by accident. I wrote about this. I wrote my feelings, not with fury, but an annoyance so pointed I hoped readers would be pricked on their side by the very tip of the stiletto gently thrust into my side of the screen. But it wasn't just novels and poetry being asked in service of a racial awakening in this case. It was music and television and big budget once upon a time blockbusters. Mass culture, in other words. This expectation, I feel, profoundly misreads the cause of pop culture's critics, profoundly misreads what Campbell's work strives towards in striving away from expectations, norms, and righteousness as rightness. That the objects that soothe us, excite us, and suck us in, along with the ones that very much do none of those things, are capable of agenting change, need never be in dispute. Those reverberations, though, involve so much meandering, a causal path one may get lost following if not taken all the way. Pop culture, I suspect, is rather like that gambler Campbell told us about long ago, playing with within boundaries pushed against, in for the thrill, chasing the take. We, as critics, stand aslant the action. We see the chips, and we may even count them, but not expect that they will add up to anything. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. That was really incredible. That was really, really outstanding. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Jackson? I've got one. Can you tell us a little bit about your next project and how that's evolving?
Yeah, great question. That's my editor would like the answer to that too. No, I'm just kidding. So the proposal I sold is basically like a collection of essays sort of loosely themed around the back as a sort of literal and metaphorical, I guess like flashpoint or I don't know, just constant within sort of American culture and American history. So the first set of essays that I have actually completed are thinking about representations of slavery, both during abolition and post-emancipation, thinking about the back as this sort of sentimental figure in abolitionist work, you know, asking slaves to, or formerly enslaved to, like, tear their shirts off and show their scars. And of course, there's the, you know, super circulated photo of, usually called the scourged back or whipped Peter, or a slave named Gordon. It has like many names and like a really interesting history that tends to be more interesting than the way we sort of circulate that photo in the present. And so thinking about the sort of afterlife of those kinds of images and things like Django Unchained, and just sort of regular neo-slave literature and just regular invocations of slavery. But that's just like, you know, a set of like 2 essays in the book, and you know, other parts of it are sort of looking at like feminized labor, both in and outside of the home, you know, the sort of racial and gender dimensions of that, thinking about the sort of monumental impact on time and keeping time that the railroads had, and who was building those railroads, and how they were sort of not really received into the body politic after enduring so much deadly labor. And so thinking all the way up to the present, where if you think about something like the current opioid crisis and the sort of overrepresentation of chronic back pain within chronic pain complaints, it's just, so yeah, it's just sort of my book length meditation on like all of these things. Obviously, I'm not going to be solving like the problem of back pain, which is like kind of the, you know, kind of the problem, which like there is no fix for back pain, but also just sort of thinking about the cultural dimensions of what it's meant to have a back and be a laborer in American history.
That sounds fascinating. It sounds really great. I'm looking forward to seeing that for sure. So thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. This has been wonderful. And for everyone watching now, you'll be able to read her thoughts in our proceedings when we have them out. So I'm looking forward to that too. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay, so I want to transition a little bit. We've got a lot of time before our next panel, which starts at 2. So we've got a lot of time. And let me share again really quickly. Oh, I have to make myself the presenter again. The joys of, and I just did. Okay, share. Okay. So, oh, and I had a slide to introduce you, Lauren, but I do that until now. Okay, so thank you. So I would like to remind everybody to please upload your papers in the digital repository if you want to share them. This is going to be online, and I'm also going to strive to get it into print. I'll probably have to talk with you all more about that, but I'm hoping to have the proceedings come out this year. So you'll get 2 lines in your CV out of this. So that's good. If you have any problems uploading your papers, please let me know. I'm going to be emailing you all when the papers and the videos are available online, and I'll be updating you too. So I also have some big news to announce, which is we have a date for the Far West Popular Culture Association 34th annual conference, which is March 4th through 6th. Actually, got that a little wrong. It's March 4th through 6th, 2022. So we've saved that date. So save that date. We do not have a venue yet, but we do have a date. And that's cleared with the national folks, but no venue yet. So we have that. Oh. So thank you guys. Before we get there, let's finish this year. Again, we're going to have all sessions starting at 2 p.m. So please go to your track room then. And thank you all for joining with us. And that concludes this session. Thank you.